Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Brian Tyler Cohen with us today. We'll chat with Brian in just a moment, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So Brian Tyler Cohen is a progressive YouTuber, podcaster, and host of the No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen podcast. He's built an audience of millions across platforms and billions of views on YouTube. His first book, Shameless, was a #1 New York Times bestseller, and he's here to discuss his new book, The Day After, How to Wield Power in a Post-Trump World, which goes on sale next week, July 14th. Brian, welcome into the back room.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Love having you here. Been hoping to do this for a while now. So I want to say first, congrats on the upcoming release next week of your latest book, The Day After, How to Wield Power in a Post-Trump World. I love the central theme of this book. Tell us about it a little.
So my central theme is that Republicans have for so long abused power. Meanwhile, you've got Democrats who refuse to even wield power when they get it. And so there's a massive asymmetry. And I think that if and when Democrats retake power in 2026 and 2028, and I think they'll take power in 2026 and 2028. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have hope that there was the promise of a better future. But if and when they take power, we can't waste that time, that precious sliver of time where we have control, debating whether we should be doing certain things, impaneling commissions to maybe at some untold point in the future take some incremental action. The time is now for Democrats to actually start wielding power in a big way. That's something that Trump has shown us can be done if you have the will to do it. Difference is that Trump is doing it for self-enrichment and to enshrine his own buildings with gold and build himself a ballroom, you name it. Democrats have to do it to actually deliver for people. Have to do it to make sure people have health care, to make sure climate change is combated, to make sure we have proper voting rights in this country. But that starts with an acknowledgement that there is a big asymmetry between the two parties, and that we have to close that gap and start governing like we have power.
And so if I could take the liberty of reducing it down to simple terms, what you're saying is Democrats need to grow some balls and fight fire with fire.
Yes, I think that's that should be the subhead. that should be. But that's exactly right. I mean, look, we have watched as like Mitch McConnell has abused these processes in the Senate to allow Amy Coney Barrett to be seated 5 minutes after an election started, but not Merrick Garland. I mean, this has been a recurring theme for as long as I can remember. Democrats are the party of strongly worded letters, and meanwhile, we're watching Trump do whatever he wants, regardless of what the law says, the Constitution says, attorneys say, judges say, Democrats in Congress say, hell, Republicans in Congress say. So I think we have to adopt the mentality, but again, not with the focus on self-enrichment, but rather just for delivering outcomes to people.
I agree with you 100%. If we truly believe that Donald Trump is a dictator wannabe and that our democracy is hanging on by a thread, which seems to me what everybody is feeling, right?
Yeah.
Why don't Democrats fight fire with fire? If there's ever a moment to grow some balls, this is it. Yet you still see this namby-pamby approach in many ways.
I think because Republicans are tearing down every institution of government, every norm, every tradition, I think that the reflexive position for Democrats is, they're tearing it down, so we have to protect it. We have to entrench it. We have to make sure that we stand up every institution that they're trying to tear down. The problem is the institutions hamstring you. The norms hamstring you. And so you have this asymmetry where one side has hamstrung themselves and the other side is doing whatever the hell they want. That's best exemplified in the fact that California and New York have independent redistricting commissions because good government. And meanwhile, you've got Texas and Florida that have gerrymanders on top of gerrymanders on top of gerrymanders. And so that's the asymmetry at play. But I think what you pointed out is exactly right. The problem is when you have one side that is tearing institutions down and the other side reflexively protecting them, then you have a political party that's protecting institutions that not only prevent them from getting anything done, but those institutions are not popular. Like, people are voting against the status quo right now. And so when you reflexively become the status quo party, it's no surprise that people are not going to heap support onto you.
Yeah, we've seen how Democrats in the last few elections, they're trying to get the electorate to understand the threat to democracy. Democracy is being threatened. And that sort of came at their detriment in the last election, because they kind of lost the focus on affordability, and the concept of autocracy and all that just really got lost on people when they're just trying to buy groceries. And so I think when you have a party that is harping on democracy, yet the people at home don't see that party fighting as if our democracy is dying, how do we expect them to care about it?
100%. And look, in large part, that's owed to the fact that not only are these folks reflexively institutionalist, but they've been there forever. Like, there is a major problem with the left embracing generational change. We also have structural issues. So in Congress, for example, your seniority determines what your position is on the committees. Republicans don't do that. And so inherently, we have the oldest members of Congress, the people who have been there for the longest amount of time, chairing these committees. Those are our megaphones. Those are the people who are going to get media attention. Those are the people who are going to be running these committees. And they are also the people who are the least media savvy, the oldest in the party, at a time when we already have a gerontocracy problem. And so, I think Democrats would be well served, Democratic officials would be well served, recognizing the fact that we need a bridge to the next generation. And that bridge can't come when you die in office, or when you can no longer even walk to the Senate or the House chamber.
Can that bridge be done with the current leadership?
I think, I think we would be well served by having new, young, dynamic leaders who are more in tune with the electorate as it stands right now.
And so, no Schumer, no Jeffries?
I think that Jeffries is probably going to end up being the House majority, the Speaker of the House. I think that Schumer is probably not long for this world. I presume if she doesn't run for president, that AOC will primary Schumer in New York and win handily.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. You discuss in the book's first chapter how for decades now, Republicans have mastered the long game of power. What has the impact of that been in real terms?
The impact of that is, of them being able to consolidate so much control over these state legislatures, these House seats. I mean, this was a project that they started in 2010. They started gerrymandering legislative and House seats a decade and a half ago, when Obama was first in office during his first term. It's 2026, and we are still trying to figure out our head from our ass in terms of how to fight fire with fire on redistricting. So I think, that is a foundational element of what we're contending with. The fact that we can't figure out how to eliminate our independent redistricting commissions, except in one state of California. And meanwhile, Republicans continue to gerrymander to the point where they have 12 new seats that they've drawn this cycle. Again, we're a decade and a half into this project by Republicans. Another project they've engaged in is making sure that they get as many Republicans onto the Supreme Court as humanly possible. They've eliminated the filibuster only for their priorities, which means confirming more judges and passing tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. Meanwhile, we can't figure out how to get rid of the filibuster for any progressive legislation. We can't get it for raising the minimum wage. We can't get it for any climate legislation. We can't get it for the Freedom to Vote Act or the Voting Rights Act. And so, again, these are a lot of different instances where we can't get out of our own way because reflexively, we are the party of institutionalists.
Yeah, and while Republicans have been mastering the long game all these years, what have Democrats been doing all these years?
Look, I think we've all endured it. I mean, I think a good example is even in the rare instance where Joe Biden had full control of government, Democrats had the ability to pass some healthcare reform, and we lowered drug prices for 10 drugs that wouldn't come into effect for years into the future. And that is, I think, the perfect encapsulation of how Democrats do things. Meanwhile, Trump ties his shoes in the morning and he throws a parade on Pennsylvania Avenue. And so like the asymmetry between the two sides in terms of exercising that power is on full display. We have an existential crisis in climate. Nothing has been done. We have an existential crisis in terms of voting rights in this country, especially as the VRA is torn down. Nothing has been done. We have existential crises in terms of healthcare in this country, in terms of affordability in this country, and nothing has been done. So the time for incrementalism, I think, is over. If Trump has shown us anything, it's that we don't have to settle for crumbs. Again, the problem is he's doing it for his own self-enrichment. Democrats have to figure out how to do it to deliver on all of those things I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. I love this quote of yours. Strong and wrong beats weak and right. How so?
I think that in large part, the Democrats have focused on, look, the Democrats obviously have an optics issue in terms of being a weak party. For so long, again, as I mentioned, they are the party of strongly worded letters. And I think that the Republicans don't constrain themselves the same way that the Democrats do. The Republicans recognize that when they have power, even to a fault, they're going to wield it to get whatever they want out of it. And there is no worrying about how they're going to be perceived. Trump is doing stuff that's completely unpopular, just like he did in his first term. And frankly, what was the downside of everything that Trump did culminating into an insurrection? It's not like they were in the wilderness for 2 decades. They were back in full control of government within a few years. I mean, right now, Republicans have the House, the Senate, and the White House. We were all around when January 6th took place. And so I think that Republicans recognize that if you can beat your chest about whatever you think is going to be the most effective way to get elected, people have a short attention span and a short memory in this country. And, if they can come out and say, we're going to be these populist champions, while Democrats are saying, well, actually, according to the data, it doesn't exactly pan out that way every single time. Who are people going to listen to more? You don't have to guess, because 2024 showed us that it's Republicans in control of the House, Senate, White House, and they got the popular vote.
You argue that democracy isn't something Americans can take for granted. Looking at where we are today, what worries you most about the health of our democratic institutions?
I think that we are at a point where if we don't win majorities in Congress in midterms, and if we don't beat Trump, beat whoever his anointed Republican candidate, or God forbid, if he decides that the Constitution just entirely doesn't count and he can run for a third term, that we won't get another chance, because they are a consolidating power in the plotting bureaucracy behind the scenes in a way that I don't think a lot of people recognize. He's trying to pass executive orders and by fiat these rules on voting, trying to get the USPS to bend to his will, trying to get the Save America Act passed, where he would consolidate a lot of state control of elections into the federal government, put the federal government in charge of allocating documents that will determine who can and can't vote. So there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes that I think if Republicans stay in power and continue to have access to these levers of government, that it will make it increasingly difficult for Democrats to have even the ability to win elections in the future. I mean, already, that Democrats have to win by a plus 5 or 7 point margin to even be able to take control of Congress. So we're already at a disadvantage. We're at a structural disadvantage in the Senate, because California, for example, has a bigger population than half the country, and yet we only have 2 senators compared to all of these other rural states. And so that is my concern, is that the longer that they're in government with the sole focus on consolidating power for themselves in perpetuity, and they've come out and said it, Trump himself has said if we pass the Save America Act, Democrats won't win another election for 100 years. So long as they're in a position to keep doing that, then I think it's going to be increasingly more difficult to actually hold on to our democracy.
And as for Trump, in terms of achieving some measure of true accountability when he leaves office, you write towards the end of the book that, quote, inside the new Justice Department, there will need to be a special unit of prosecutors and investigators. Explain what this would look like and what the ultimate goals would be.
This would look like holding these people who are committing so much either outright criminality or corruption right now, whether it's on something as small as violations of the Hatch Act, whether it's as large as the short sales that we see 5 minutes before Trump makes some big announcement. We're seeing him funnel money from foreign countries like UAE and Qatar into World Liberty Financial, and then lo and behold, we give them some military protection, or Trump gets to build some, golf course in a foreign country and they get some tariff benefit from that. All of this stuff is happening expressly because Trump doesn't think that there's going to be any consequences for it. And frankly, I get why he believes that, because Trump 1.0 was followed by Merrick Garland, who was so afraid of offering up the optics of politicization that he basically said, if you have an R next to your name, you can get away with anything scot-free. So there has to be something done, not only so that we remain a country of laws where people who commit crimes or engage in corruption are held accountable for it, but so that it offers something of a deterrent effect for elected officials in the future to not think that they can do this and get away with it every single time.
And what about those in Trump's orbit, in his cabinet, his aides, who seem to feel like, there's a blanket pardon coming down for Trump and everyone around him, and we could do whatever we want to? I think a lot of these people are sort of underestimating what the consequences could ultimately be beyond criminal prosecution. You have civil prosecution, you have law licenses that were stripped after the first term, but it does seem like these people are acting with impunity.
Totally. And, I think it's important to recognize, too, you brought up those points were exactly spot on. It's also worth noting, too, that Trump didn't pardon everybody after his first term. Like, Trump cares about Trump. And if you are not either totally loyal to him, or even there are people who are totally loyal to him, his priority is not you. Loyalty is a one-way street with Trump. It's not a transaction. You don't get something for giving something. You give something, and that's it. That's where it ends. That's where that transaction ends. And so I think a lot of these people who are engaging in this corruption, thinking that they're going to be protected by him, I would ask what happened to Michael Cohen and George Papadopoulos and Gordon Sondland and Kayleigh McEnany and Rance Priebus and Mike Pence and Marjorie Taylor Greene, all of these people who were Trump loyalists who've become persona non grata in the GOP because they said either one ill word of Trump, didn't help him, didn't break the law for him one single time, and suddenly he cast them to the curb.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost play this out and look at like the campaign that will begin in the not too distant future for the 28th nomination in the party. And, the front runners today are J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, people that are working with Trump. Like Kamala Harris and Biden, they're going to need to separate themselves from Trump. So to your point, the nanosecond they start saying, hey, that was Trump, that's not me, the pardon wall is probably going to shut down, with anyone around him who's running for president who starts shit-talking him, or anyone else who's trying to move beyond Trump and maybe even move beyond Trumpism. So if the Democrats do regain some congressional control, what should they view as their highest priority on day one? Not necessarily politically, but institutionally, to strengthen democratic norms and restore public trust?
So I think that the first thing that has to be done is the filibuster has to be eliminated. The filibuster is in place just for Democratic priorities. Like I mentioned, Republicans have eliminated the filibuster on the two things they care about, judges and tax cuts. But the filibuster is still intact for any Democratic priority, so passing any progressive legislation, making sure that we can increase the federal minimum wage, which hasn't been increased in decades, to make sure that we have voting rights for people, that we have the Freedom to Vote Act or a Voting Rights Act, some reiteration of the VRA that was just struck down. We could also be in a position then where D.C. could have statehood. There are a lot of things that need to be done that we are preventing ourselves from getting done because we are so reliant on entrenching these institutions that frankly only hamstring one party.
It's not a level playing field. And that sort of harkens back to the points we were making before, is that if Democrats don't recognize this now, especially as they see their role, their power, their congressional authority just diminishing by the minute, when are they going to recognize that and fight? Right. You can also look at that in terms of the Supreme Court, who keeps expanding executive power. It's as if they're not watching what he's actually doing right now. Their response to him, as if they're dealing with a normal president who respects the norms and the boundaries and the institutions and the rule of law, because the power they're giving him is like saying, go ahead, be a bigger dictator wannabe.
The biggest reform I think that needs to be done The filibuster would be the first, but the biggest one that needs to be done is the Supreme Court needs to be expanded from 9 to 13. The number of Supreme Court seats has always comported with the number of federal court circuits. I think in like the 1800s, we had 6. So we had 6 Supreme Court justices that eventually went up to 8 and 9. We have 9 Supreme Court justices. Now we have 13 federal court circuits, and we still have 9 Supreme Court justices. That's the historical argument for it. It's not in the Constitution. And in fact, even Republicans in modern times have changed the number of the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell brought it down from 9 to 8 for a year because he didn't want Merrick Garland to get appointed to the court. But the moral argument for the Supreme Court is, let's say that we achieve the Herculean feat of winning the House, winning the Senate, winning the White House. Already pretty difficult to do. Then pass legislation, another Herculean feat. If we leave in place this 6-3 court that is completely deferential to Trump, that will completely undermine the Constitution if it means it can help the Republican Party, we are basically saying we're okay passing legislation that this Supreme Court can and will inevitably strike down. Like, we're basically saying, as long as we get caught trying, as long as we engage in symbolic victories before the Supreme Court guts whatever legislation we pass, then that's good enough for us. And so I argue that that's not good enough. Like, we need meaningful, lasting change. And the only way you get that is by expanding the court so that you don't give a permanent veto to a Supreme Court that has been shown to completely disregard the Constitution if it means the Republican Party gets some advantage.
And just legislatively, what has to happen to expand the court?
So the filibuster would have to be eliminated, and then it would just be through regular order. I mean, they can get it done 51 with a simple majority in Congress.
Do you think they have the balls for that?
Well, that's what I argue in the book. I mean,
right.
This is the moment. Look, we here's the deal. A lot of the American electorate is completely disillusioned with the Democratic Party because Joe Biden came into office and wanted to return to the status quo. People are not happy with the status quo. So there was a massive realignment and people voted for Republicans. And Trump won a whole generation of Americans that, frankly, he had no business winning, but Democrats were just not getting it done. And so there was a huge realignment and they went for Trump and Republicans. He fumbled the ball in such a massive way because he refuses to deliver on his own promises. Even now, we find out he won't even sign his own housing bill that was in accordance with his own campaign promise. He refuses to deliver for people. So we have this opportunity for a second bite of the apple that, frankly, we have no business having if it weren't for Trump's egregious incompetence. But we do have this opportunity. So if we don't start delivering, if we don't make the most of that opportunity while we have power in the short window that we have power, then people are just going to put up their hands and say, neither party is working for us. I'm out. So we have to use this rare sliver of time where we're going to have full control of government. I argue it's going to happen in 2029 to actually do something, because if we don't, we're going to lose a generation of Americans for the entirety of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, the point you made before is really the one people should focus on, and that is that Mitch McConnell held a seat open, kept the court 8 seats for a year because he didn't want to do what he constitutionally was mandated to do. And so there's precedent that's set for this kind of thing. And I just don't know if Democrats have the stomach for it, because they still, I watch them and it seems like there's this pathological need to impress Republicans still with their fairness, with their balance, with their objectivity, even while they're getting spanked. I mean, it's like when you watch TV, the news, and you'll see a panel discussion, and then Trump will literally not drool. And there'll be a Democrat that goes, he was presidential tonight.
Right. Different. We have a tone shift from the president.
Yeah. The big pivot came. He didn't drool. The bar is so low for him and Republicans, and this continuing desire to be above the fray, to be better than them. This is what they would do. This is not what we do. As democracy is falling off the rooftop. I mean, it's stunning to see it in the middle of 2026 stuff.
It's the reason I wrote the book. I mean, look, I wouldn't have written a book about demanding people on the left wield power if people on the left were capable of wielding power. Here's an example of how I think the book has been effective. A few months back, I was interviewing Gavin Newsom about, I can't remember exactly what the main thrust of the interview was, but within the interview, I brought up the idea of Supreme Court expansion, and he was really chilly on the idea, like immediately cast it down. And that's been something I've been advocating for years. And, it was just a point of disagreement between us. It's something I've been advocating for. He is more of an institutionalist, and so just wasn't down for that idea. A couple of weeks ago now, I'm on his podcast, and we were talking about the book. And again, this is a book pushing Democrats to wield power when they get it. And we were talking about the Supreme Court. And I made the argument about, the historical imperative to do this, about the moral imperative to do this. And he said, you know what? I'm coming around to your view now. We're done. We should be done winning arguments. We should just start winning. And so that's an example of like, these people can be pushed. They're not going to be the first ones to move. But I think that's my job is to, as an activist, is to push them. And this is an instance where, while talking about a book pushing Democrats to embrace power, I got to persuade a Democrat to embrace his power. And so that's the whole point of what I'm trying to do. And even in that, anecdotal instance, it worked. And so I think that, again, I wouldn't need to write a book about wielding power if we didn't have a problem doing it already. But because we do, at least I have the opportunity now to try and make the case. And even in the instances where I've sat down with folks, that's been working.
Yeah. So we've been talking about the midterms. We know that there are two issues that we really care about: affordability and democracy. We know that democracy is a little bit of a slippery slope when it comes to the electorate, especially as they're paying $4 a gallon for gas and can't afford groceries. Where's that fine line? What should the balance be? There's a part of me that thinks it should just be affordability, 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 housing, healthcare, gas, groceries, over and over and over again. Like Carville said, it's the economy, stupid.
Yep.
But, saving democracy is kind of important. How should Democrats approach this, both strategically and in their messaging?
So I think what you said is correct, that Democrats should focus on affordability, because the reality is the people for whom democracy is a major issue, like both of us, we already know. Like, we are tuned in enough to politics to know the threats of democracy that we're contending with. And anybody who is attuned enough to know what we're contending with is already going to be a high information voter, already persuaded and recognize the dangers that Trump poses. I think what we're looking to do in this election cycle, what we have to do in this election cycle, is reach out to all of those other people who are completely disaffected and disillusioned with politics, people who might have voted for Trump and Republicans in the last election because they were relentlessly focused on affordability and now recognize that it was all a scam, it was a con, that they never had any intention of delivering. But I think that, in our messaging, it would be ridiculous not to recognize the potency that affordability has. Trump won an entire election off of it. Republicans won an entire election off of it. And because they're so incompetent and they refuse to deliver on anything, they refuse to lower costs, they refuse to not engage in foreign wars, they refuse to release the Epstein files, they refuse to curb inflation, they refuse to bring gas prices down, they refuse to bring grocery prices down. Nothing has been done. Now we have an opportunity to exploit the one issue that was so effective for them in 2024. But again, I think, on the democracy front, obviously it's important, but the people who know that it's important already know. They're already tuned in.
You're raising an interesting point about the electorate and the broken promises and the betrayals by Trump and the lies. I'm a New Yorker, so I'm going to use a sports analogy that'll help make my point. If you're a Mets fan, you viscerally can't sit in Yankee Stadium without feeling ill. Okay, like it's like being a traitor. What do you say to someone who's never voted Democrat, but who's just tired, who's angry, who's exhausted, who's fed up with him, but just is that Met fan who can't quite make it through the doors at Yankee Stadium, but may want to? How do you pull them through this year?
I think by pointing to the fact that the Republican Party is not entitled to anyone's support, especially when they refuse to deliver on their own promises. Like, nobody forced Trump to say that he was going to lower housing costs or rent costs or grocery costs. Nobody forced him to get so granular about affordability that he spoke about the price of an egg. Just like nobody forced him when he got into office to ignore all of those things. Nobody forced him to engage in a foreign war where we spend $120 billion going overseas. Nobody forced him to do that. That would raise the cost of gas here at home. Nobody forced him to cut healthcare prices for 17 million Americans who rely on Medicaid and 24 million Americans who rely on the ACA. Nobody forced him to cut $186 billion from food assistance. He made the conscious decision to do that. So if he's not going to be true to his promises to Americans are not are not being forced to vote for him. He is not entitled their votes, especially when he has shown nothing but contempt for them. Your party affiliation is not your identity. And I think the Republicans have been really effective at merging, at fusing those two. But they do it so that people feel obligated to vote for a specific party. I think that people have to recognize when they go out and figure out who to vote for that this is about them. This is not what can the country do for our politicians. It's what can our politicians do for Americans. And if we have a political party that outright refuses to deliver for people because they feel like they're entitled to everybody's support just by virtue of having an R next to their name, then people's lives are going to continue to get markedly worse. Already we're a country that is sicker, poorer, and hungrier than we were 4 years ago. This is the first generation that's going to be less prosperous than their kids. And so, if the most important thing is just adhering to your political affiliation and having an R next to your name, then, by all means continue for voting for a party that isn't going to deliver for you. But if your focus is yourself, your family, your health care, the food on your table, the wages that you're getting paid, then you have to be responsive to the conditions on the ground. And right now there is a political party in power that is broadcasting that it's not interested in helping people.
But can Democrats truly appeal to those people when the party has been so dangerously taken over and hijacked by socialists and communists? That's some New York sarcasm right there.
Right. Look, I mean, the funny thing about Zohran Mamdani as a DSA...
who, by the way, you could be a stand-in for.
Oh, well...
I don't know if you heard that before, but...
is that there was so much concern that crime would skyrocket, that nothing would get done, that we would devolve into mayhem and chaos and pandemonium. New York now has the lowest crime rate, I think, in modern history, and 175,000 potholes have been filled, and buses are running faster. So, again, there will be a lot of fear-mongering from the other side about all of the terrible things that are going to happen when we devolve into a spooky Marxist communist form of government. But all that's happened in practice is that people's lives have gotten better, crime has gone down, and what the government is supposed to be doing is what the government is doing.
Yeah, well, there's this narrative that they're obviously pushing, and I think the media is helping them, and that is that the Democratic Party is they're pushed so far to the left. Yet we don't hear about the victories of Ben McAdams in Utah won, Nancy LaCour in South Carolina won, Kate Conley, who I just interviewed this week again, up in New York 17. These are not only moderates, but people with combat veteran backgrounds, former intelligence officials. And the interesting thing is, and the important thing is that those victories that occurred the same night as Mamdani's hat trick, those are the victories that are going to move the needle on the House being flipped. What goes on in New York City isn't going to matter, right? But yet the Republicans are creating this narrative. Trump is embellishing it by calling the victors communists, and the media is kind of running with that as well. What do you make of how do you help people understand what's really happening in the Democratic Party right now?
Republicans and right-wing media and legacy media have been fear-mongering about communist Marxist takeovers for literally my entire life. They said it about Clinton, they said it about Obama, they said it about Biden. The reality is and I try not to get into the look at the metrics thing because I think that it's a trap that Democrats have fallen into, but in my entire lifetime, we have never had a Republican administration that's created more jobs than a Democratic administration. In my entire lifetime, we've never had a Republican administration that's had lower unemployment than a Democratic administration. My entire lifetime, we've never had a Republican administration that's had higher GDP than a Democratic administration. So there is only one party that continuously delivers for people, only one party that plunges us into recessions for my entire lifetime, only one party that's gotten us out of those recessions for my entire lifetime. Republicans rely on this fear porn to get what they want. But if you actually look at any of the results that both parties have been able to deliver, it's clear which party is interested in heaping benefits onto the wealthiest Americans and which country is actually delivering for regular people. The job now has to be on Democrats to actually recognize that it's time to sack up and use some power effectively and not just rely on incrementalism. Democrats have the better ideas. Climate change is regarded as real and a pressing issue by the majority of Americans. Ending subsidies to fossil fuels, another important, popular idea in this country. Expanding voting rights, a popular idea in this country. Making sure everybody has access to healthcare, a popular idea in this country. Even Medicare for all, according to the latest polling that was done between Searchlight and Zateo, showed that 52% of Americans now embrace the idea of Medicare for all. The fact that we're the richest country in the world and don't have access to universal health care is a joke. So I think the ideas are on our side and the electorate is ready for this stuff. Now it's just a matter of getting our elected officials on board to do it.
Mm-hmm. Let's switch gears and talk about a couple of the big stories out there. Let's start with the Graham Platner. This ride has been a mess from the get-go. Where did he and the party go wrong?
Well, clearly there was a failure in vetting. And I think that there was, and in one respect, I understand the willingness to have a different kind of candidate. He is dynamic. He is charismatic. He is unabashedly progressive, and he espouses a lot of the big ticket ideas that I think their time has come. The problem is, he lied about his past. He lied to the voters. He entrenched his positions even when he was called out on those lies. And on one hand, I think that it is a failure of the existing Democratic Party that people were willing to look past so many egregious issues with Graham Platner, because that's just how feckless and impotent the existing establishment Democrats have become, that, even while there was a conversation about a guy who had a Nazi tattoo, that was permissible for a large chunk of the electorate. But I don't think that would be the case if we had an effective Democratic Party already in place. But beyond that, look, I do think that there is something to be said for when this final story, this nail in the coffin, came out, that there was unanimity in Democrats calling for him to step aside. And I think that puts on full display the asymmetry between the two parties, because, you have Republican candidates who've also engaged in similar behavior, whether it's Herschel Walker or Eric Greitens, or, even Matt Gaetz was accused of sex trafficking of a minor, got a potential promotion to Attorney General of the United States. Trump himself, credibly accused of sexual assault or harassment by more than 24 women, just had to pay E. Jean Carroll $5 million for sexual abuse and harassment as found by a judge. And so, the asymmetry between the two parties, where for one party, whether it's Eric Swalwell or in this case, Graham Platner, there's unanimity in telling these people to step aside or resign or suspend their campaigns. And the other side, it almost feels like a prerequisite. That I think is a pretty good testament to what one party feels is acceptable versus the other.
Yeah, well, that's the difference between the Democrats and Republicans. Democrats force out of politics their sexual predators, and Republicans name bridges and airports after theirs, right? Yeah, it's kind of crazy. What'd you make of his campaign suspension video and his decision subsequently to literally wait till the last minute this coming Monday at 4:59 to officially get his paperwork in to quit?
I think it was, the video itself was marred by just such a glaring lack of any conciliatory tone. It was defiant. It was almost framing himself as the victim in this situation.
Very MAGA-like.
It was. And the fact that he's waiting until Monday, why are we prolonging this? Why are we dragging this out? What benefit do we derive from this? The answer to that question, I asked it rhetorically, but the answer is he is trying to retain what leverage he thinks he has to dictate who comes next. I think he is vastly overestimating the amount of leverage that he has, because you have a party that's pretty pissed off at this guy for lying about what he's done, and really putting us in a position where even in a D+5 or 7 or 10, I don't know what the national environment is going to look like, but putting at risk a seat that we absolutely should win. Like, we're talking about winning seats in Iowa and Alaska and Texas, but if the Maine Senate seat, because Graham Platner is such a massive screw up, if the Maine Senate seat is suddenly at risk, I mean, look, this is the difference between life and death for people. If we're not able to take the Senate because somebody decided to screw around in their campaign, it can mean the difference between codifying abortion rights and not. It can mean the difference between raising the minimum wage that people rely on to survive or not. It can mean the difference between making sure that tens of millions of Americans, if not hundreds of millions of Americans, have health care or not. So this isn't a game here, and people rely on making sure that we have a Democratic majority so that they can have some hope at living either with dignity or living at all. And the fact that Graham Platner is viewing this as like the last minutes of his 15 minutes of fame so that he can try and exercise what little power he thinks he has, I think is pretty egregious here.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw the video and what he's done subsequently, it just, to me, it sort of speaks to what may be his true character. You know, the defiance, the dismissiveness, the narcissism, the woe is me, the victimhood, the demands, all of that. You know, it starts to make you wonder, like, okay, yeah, these are allegations, but could they be true with this guy? And it's hard not to include that they can be true with this guy.
Something I thought was interesting was he framed it as if this was another attack on him by the establishment. And like, right. I am sympathetic to the anti-establishment sentiment spreading across the party, and in fact have been an advocate for making sure that we can, the whole book is about making sure that we can get fighters in there to overcome this stasis by the establishment. But like, this is not the establishment that did this. This is an accusation leveled, a credible accusation leveled against you by a woman who you allegedly sexually assaulted. So I think that also undermines his own, like, if everything is the establishment, then nothing becomes the establishment. And so if you really have a legitimate gripe with the establishment, which I believe he does, then you should have some integrity with being consistent about when they're at fault and when they're not.
Mm-hmm. Last question, Iran, which seems like just such a clusterfuck this week with Trump and what he says and doesn't say, or says for the 40th time. We're still hearing how Iran wants to make a deal. We're still hearing how Putin wants to make a deal. I mean, there's a great montage that I think CNN put together of all the times he says they want to make a deal. Where do you see this going?
Here's what I think. I think Trump knows that there is no way he's going to be successful here. Iran can wait him out. They don't have midterm elections. They have an Ayatollah. He doesn't have midterm elections coming up this November. The Ayatollah is well aware of the fact that we do have elections coming up this November. Ayatollah is also aware that gas prices are surging. I think yesterday we had the biggest one-day increase in gas prices of this presidency. And we also see that because the Strait of Hormuz has now become a toll route, or is now constantly closed. That's affecting costs here at home. It's driving inflation up. So they have all the leverage. I think Trump knows that he's lost this thing, but he doesn't want to end it right now because we have midterms coming up and it's going to make him look weak. And so I think that we're going to see this thing drag out until after midterms in fits and starts with memorandums of understanding, more Iran nuclear deals that start and stop and start and stop. And he's going to do whatever he can to drag this thing out, because the last thing he wants to do with midterms approaching is admit defeat. And that's the inevitability of this thing. There is no way for America to be success. Like, they're not obliterating Iran's nuclear capabilities. They're not able to stop Iran from charging tolls in the Strait of Hormuz. And so, they're not able to be successful in regime change. I mean, they went from Ayatollah Khomeini to Ayatollah Khomeini. So Trump knows that he's lost this thing. He's not going to end it right now and look weak in midterms. And so I think we're just going to have more of the same for months and months and months. And then finally, in December or January of 2026 or 2027, I think that's when we're going to see, Trump declare victory and just try to end this, even though it will be clear that it's a definitive defeat.
Brian, congrats again on the book, The Day After, How to Wield Power in a Post-Trump World. It goes on sale next week, July 14th. Great conversation. Let's do it again sometime.
I appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.
Alrighty, take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhiniecliff, with additional editing by Matty Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Lengyel. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.